Many people would consider a vehicle with over 100,000 miles as something to be avoided. Too old, washed up, on its way out, or even junk. I am not one of those people. In fact, I'm known for quite the opposite. I buy high mileage vehicles like this 265,000 mile Toyota Land Cruiser. And subsequently, because I'm known for it, a lot of people like to ask, how is this thing holding up after all those miles? That's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna dive deep into this thing. We're gonna go over what works, what doesn't, how it's wearing, and everything that's had to have been replaced to get this thing to 250,000 miles. Welcome everyone to another episode of Eat, Sleep, Drive, and this one is of course all about my Toyota Land Cruiser. This is probably the best vehicle I've ever owned, and I've owned a lot of vehicles. Ironically, it has the most mileage out of any vehicle I've ever owned as well. Ironic. Is it actually ironic? I feel like ever since the 90s with Alanis Morissette misusing that word, I'm afraid to use the word ironic. Anyway, back to the Toyota Land Cruiser. We're gonna be diving deep into this thing. I'm gonna show you guys kind of how it's been wearing, from interior to the exterior, mechanically, all that stuff. We're gonna dive deep into it because I get a lot of questions as to how it's holding up. And as you can see, it's still going after 250,000 miles and going quite strong, I might add, but we'll get into all that. So the beating heart of any internal combustion engine vehicle is, of course, the engine. So that's what we're going to start with. Let's dive in. Yep, the hood struts even work. Now with any high mileage engine, you would expect it to start burning a little bit of oil just because as the piston rings and stuff kind of wear out, you might get some blow by and it might consume some oil in the combustion chamber or maybe even leak it or something like that. But what about this car with 265,000 miles on it? Let's check the oil here. I'm going to clean off the dipstick and slide her home. My fingers don't work because it's freezing out here. There's about 2,000 miles on this oil change, and hopefully, as you can see, that oil is spot on. There's like no perceivable amount of oil burning going on with this engine, which is absolutely remarkable for a V8 engine with 265,000 miles on it. It just goes to show the testament to these Toyota engines, specifically this V8 is just absolutely insanely built and should last basically forever. Like, I'm sure everything else will fall apart before this engine stops working. So what kind of stuff has been replaced to get this thing to 250,000 miles? Now, of course, it's had the usual things, oil changes, the brakes have been done. It did have the shocks replaced once, but outside of that, like, what else does this car need to keep going? Well, I did have to replace the driver's side axle. Basically, it was doing a bunch of clicking noise, which is indicative of a bad axle. And when I got into the car, I noticed that the boot was torn, which was problem number one. And there was no grease in the boot because it was torn. Now, how did that boot get torn? It was probably from me off-roading this thing, which I do. So who knows how long that would have gone on, or who knows how long that original axle would have went if it would have retained all its grease. The passenger side, to my knowledge, is still original. It looks original, and it's holding up just fine. So that's more of a self-inflicted wound. Outside of that, this thing does have a timing belt, which needs to be replaced. And usually when you do the timing belt, you do the water pump and stuff like that. It's been done twice on this car because it has to be done every 100,000 miles. So that is something to keep in mind with these things. It's a regular routine maintenance item, but it is a little costly and time consuming to do. And being that this car has had it done twice, it just kind of goes to show how many miles it has on it. One other thing that's probably worth mentioning on these things is that the wheel bearings are serviceable. So keep that in mind if you're interested in a Land Cruiser. I had mine serviced and they repacked the grease when I did the axles. It's a good idea to do them whenever you do the brakes and stuff like that. This is different than a lot of cars that just have the cartridge style that just eventually go bad and you replace the whole bearing. So these, it's nice that you can service them, but you do have to keep in mind that you have to service them. Now, how about the rest of the drivetrain? The transmission is original, 265,000 miles, shifts absolutely great. The fluid, of course, has been changed, but just like any other car, it's not too bad. One thing to keep in mind, the drive shaft I had a little bit of clunking with when I would like downshift. But you can once again look at a previous video. I greased the drive shaft, took a grease gun to the Zerk fittings on the drive shaft, and that thing is butter now. The shifting is super smooth again. So just, you know, a little bit of routine maintenance stuff, keep up with this thing, and it treats you really, really well. Now I just fired this thing up so you could hear this engine purr. It's cold outside, obviously the engine's cold, it's not warmed up. I'm just gonna give you guys a listen. This is like the quietest 250,000-mile engine ever. It's so quiet. So while we're out here, let's do a quick walk around to the exterior. Most of the stuff with the exterior is gonna be self-inflicted, like this over here is me hitting my garage and a bunch of other stuff. So, and off-roading and of course stuff like that. But one of the things that I definitely wanted to touch on is the clear coat and the paint quality. This car has been stored outside a lot and hasn't really been like treated in the best condition. And of course you can't really see it now because the car is all wet. Thank you so much to Ohio for snowing while I'm doing this video. But the clear coat, trust me on this car, is in great shape. And you can see some scratches down the side. Once again, some self-inflicted stuff. We like to call this, or people in Colorado call this Colorado pinstriping, because I got that off-roading on some narrow trails with some overhanging trees scratching my car. But the other big thing outside of like, you know, the paint being in good condition and stuff, and something that a lot of people overlook when they look at cars, is look at these like weather seals and stuff. All the rubber outside here. If I could get my camera to focus. This stuff is in such good shape. A lot of cars you'll see this all like dry rotted and like just super perished, but the seals on these doors and these windows and stuff, like for being 13 years old and a car that has been kept outside a lot, I parked this thing outside a lot. I have reason to believe that the previous owner parked this thing outside. Like, it's all in really good shape. And you know, I'll show you guys the underside. Of course, I've undercoated this thing, so if you want to see what it looked like before I undercoated, you could check out my video of when I undercoated it, because you'll see what it looked like before. But it's really good shape underneath. This doesn't have the issue like the Tundras and the Tacomas had, or even the 4Runners, where there was like rusty frame issues. I believe this frame was built in a completely different factory, so it doesn't really suffer from those issues. Rear tailgate on my last one was rusted out. It was a older model, and it was in like New York its whole life, so sometimes that happens on these, but fortunately this one's good. Some more self-inflicted wounds here. Let's jump inside the car real quick. So you can see the exterior is worn pretty nicely, and by worn nicely I mean not worn too bad. Let's look at these seats here, because this is a common issue or a common point that I see wear quite poorly on these cars. Not too bad on my car, but a lot of ones I've seen, especially with high mileage for sale, this seat will be like all torn up. It'll be ripped or whatever. And one thing you can definitely do to help that is to condition these seats, kind of rehydrate the material and leather. This one is clearly not too bad, and especially considering having 250,000 miles on it, it's just kind of showing some wear here where people slide in and out. And you can see the bolster on this side is kind of mushed down from people sliding in and out. Let's take a look at the rest of the interior and jump in here, because it's way warmer in here than it is outside. I just want to show you guys and prove to you that we're well past 250,000 miles. 264,339, that's almost 265. And you can see car's running, idle super smooth, no check engine light. I do have a tire pressure monitor light. Once again, another self-inflicted wound because I didn't put sensors in the wheels when I put these big old tires on. So outside of that, like, this thing runs great. And you can see no check engine light, which I think is a good indication of that. Cracked windshield here. That happened before I bought it. Not sure what the deal with that is, but that's not something that is the car's problem. The infotainment I have had some issues with. First of all, can you guys see the antenna out there? That guy, he needs like one of those blue pills, you know what I mean? Like he doesn't get fully extended. I'm not sure what the deal with that is, but when you turn the car on, the antenna only goes up like, what is that, 4 or 5 inches? So that is a bit of a problem. I have had glitches with the infotainment system where it was stuck on like one screen, and no matter what I did, like turn the car off, turn it back on, it would just stay stuck on one screen, so I couldn't use it. And on that one, all I ended up doing was removing the battery cable for a little bit and plugging it back in, and it seemed to have reset itself and started working. So I sort of got lucky there. But let's look at the wear of the rest of this thing. So there's some wear here from somebody's probably greasy arm, maybe mine. There's a little bit of wear down here from getting in and out on the speaker cover. I don't exactly treat this thing super nicely. I don't like the light color interior, but that's not necessarily a problem with the car. It just gets dirty super easy. I want to focus on some of the wear on some of this stuff. Now, you won't be able to see it now because it's daylight, but when it's nighttime and the lights come on, all these lettering for the climate control and stuff gets backlit, and it's like lit up so you can see them at night, except for these 2 buttons. They all work except for these 2 buttons. So I could see the AM, the FM all lit up nicely at night, but these ones don't get lit up. And outside of, there's like some dirt you could see on these, but the lettering and stuff at least hasn't really worn off, which is something that I couldn't say on my Porsche that had like, let's see, 1/5 the mileage on it, which is actually quite sad. But so I guess my point there is that these kind of things have held up pretty well. This painted plastic stuff scratches really easy, as you can probably see, and I usually drag my keys across it and stuff like that. So it's not, once again, that I treat it super well, but this stuff kind of wears poorly. The rest of the stuff that's like soft touch is in really great shape, and I've already mentioned kind of the seats are really good. But outside of that, when it comes to like, do things work or not, everything works. Like the windows work, the locks work, the sunroof up here works. Like everything works, which is definitely a testament to the Land Cruiser build quality with 265,000 miles on it. Well guys, that's it for me and the good old Land Cruiser. I hope you guys enjoyed the video this time. I get so many requests and so many people asking about this thing all the time because they know it has a lot of miles and they want to know like how it's worn and how it holds up and is it still going. And as you can see, it definitely is still going. It's running super strong. And the big thing for me is like being confident in a car enough to take it anywhere, especially off-road, right? I would literally drive this thing anywhere over the US, or really anywhere for that matter right now, despite the fact that it has 250,000 miles on it. I just trust it that much. It's never let me down in the year and a half that I've had it, and it shows no indication of letting up. These things are just built so well. So the whole point of this video is to show that if a car is cared for, and especially if you pick a good one to begin with, a good car like the Toyota Land Cruiser that's built super well, that you shouldn't be afraid of mileage. Like, mileage is no problem for well cared for, well engineered cars. So once again, I hope you guys enjoyed the content. If you want to follow me in between episodes and see what I'm up to, check me out on Instagram at Eat Sleep Drive TV. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you guys on the next one.